This is one of St. John Henry Newman's most famous meditations. God has created me to do him some definite service. He has committed some work to me which he has not committed to another. I have my mission. I may never know it in this life, but I shall be told it in the next. Somehow I am necessary for his purposes, as necessary in my place as an archangel in his. If indeed I fail, he can raise another, as he could make the stones children of Abraham. Yet I have a part in this great work. I am a link in a chain, a bond of connection between persons. He has not created me for naught. I shall do good. I shall do his work. I shall be an angel of peace, a preacher of truth in my own place, even while not intending it, if I do but keep his commandments and serve him in my calling. Whatever, wherever I am, I can never be thrown away. If I am in sickness, my sickness may serve him. In perplexity, my perplexity may serve him. If I am in sorrow, my sorrow may serve him. My sickness or perplexity or sorrow may be necessary causes of some great end which is quite beyond us. He does nothing in vain. He may prolong my life. He may shorten it. He knows what he is about. He may take away my friends. He may throw me among strangers. He may make me feel desolate, make my spirits sink, hide my future from me. Still, he knows what he is about. Therefore, I will trust him. I don't know whether I mentioned before, but this is a really good one. It's John Henry Newman, Prayers, Verses, and Devotions. And you can find that beautiful meditation right in there. So this evening, I want to tell us, having spoken to you about the spiritual battle that we all face against the devil and the corrosive effects of the world, so little supportive of our faith and our own egocentricity. Having talked about that, having talked about some of the things we can put into action, some of the tools God gives us in order to fight the good fight, having done all of that, tonight I want to talk more briefly than the other nights about why we can fight this battle. It sounds paradoxical, in peace, with peace and tranquility and joy and confidence. And the reason is very simple. It was summed up in that beautiful meditation by John Henry Newman. We're God's children, and he knows what he's about. He's the author of the story that we're part of. We're only a little part of the story, maybe a page, maybe a paragraph, maybe only a few words. And so it's no wonder that often we don't understand the sense of the whole story. You couldn't open a book and read just one paragraph and get the sense of the whole story. But one day we'll see God face to face, and the author will explain exactly how we fitted into the story and how important our place in the story was, our part in the story was, even if we weren't able to see it in this life. So we have great confidence in God, and I want to share with you this evening a story that's illustrative of God's never-failing providential care for us. It is a truly, to me, amazing story. I think you'll agree. I can personally vouch for all the details of the story because I happen to be the main character after God and some of the wonderful people I'll talk about in the story. But I don't tell it to you because it's my story. I tell it to you because I can vouch for the facts, and it's God's story. So I want you to go back with me a ways, a time Most of you remember, I'm looking out at this congregation, most of you were alive and adult when the events that I'm going to describe happened to me. So let's go back to the year 1969. I was wearing a very different outfit at the time. Instead of all of this beautiful purple, I was dressed in olive drab. And I had just recently converted to Catholicism in my junior year in college, and then gone into the Army within a month of graduating college, gone through basic training and advanced infantry training, and then I was sent to Vietnam as a soldier. The reason being that I was a philosophy major, so they made me a rifleman in an infantry company. They couldn't think of anything else to do with me. So I was one of those guys who was on the ground out in the boondocks, and I spent a year out there. But I want to focus in on a specific date. I'm really bad with dates. Honestly, I have a hard time remembering people's birthdays, even when they're my own family. I have to write them down. But there's a date in my life that I think I'll never forget. I'm 73 now, and perhaps slipping into a little bit of dementia, but still I remember this date. Father Scalero tells me I'm more than slipping, I'm falling headlong. So the date is May 27th, 1969. And I was out with Delta Company, 4th of the 12th, that was the battalion, the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, and we were going out on an operation in a jungle. It was a pretty dense jungle, and as luck would have it on that particular day, I was elected to be, we did a round robin in this regard. Some places, in some units, they always had the same guy walking the point position because he was really good at it. Since we didn't have anybody who was really good at it, we all took turns, and it was my turn. So I was the point man that day. That means I'm the guy up front, hacking my way through, making a path for everybody else. So we started out pretty early in the morning, and I began hacking my way through all of these vines and so forth. Maybe 2-3 hours later, maybe about 11 o'clock in the morning, my squad leader came up to me, and he said, "You really look beat." He was very perceptive. "Why don't you drop back and I'll take over for you?" Now you got to understand, that's very unusual. He's a squad leader. What he normally would have said, or what some as a squad leader would have said, "Why don't you drop back? You get up here. You're the point man." But he took over. He took over. And from about here to the back of the church, that's how far he walked. And he and we walked into an ambush, and he was killed instantly. And everybody in the squad, including me, was hit. The guy behind me, young fellow, young boy, the average age of a soldier in Vietnam was 19. I was ancient, I was 21. The guy behind me lost his leg from the knee down. I was really lucky. Of all the people, and I was pretty far up front, of all the people in the squad, I probably got the lightest wounds. I got hit in the leg and the shoulder, and it wasn't too bad. I spent a week, a month in the rear recovering. I had some surgery in a field hospital like MASH, and then I went back out into the field. I was in Delta Company. I was reassigned to Echo Company, but it was still an infantry company. And I wound up working with a small specialty squad nicknamed the Rat Patrol. I'm not going to get into all of that. I spent the next 9 months there and managed to get out unscathed. So just keep that date in mind and what happened on that date. Now I want to leave that arena and I want to jump forward 15 years. 15 years. By then, I was a priest. And by the way, I did not come home from Vietnam saying, I got to become a priest. It didn't even occur to me. It honestly didn't occur to me. I was already a Catholic, but I had no intention of being a priest. In fact, I went down to Catholic University and took some more philosophy. And it was while I was down there that I started to think maybe that's the direction I should go in. So 15 years after May 27th, 1969, I'm a Catholic priest in my second assignment. I finished the seminary, I went through my first assignment out in Centereach, and now I was an associate pastor, an assistant in St. Joseph's in Hewlett, not too far from here. And one day I got a call. It was from a young fellow out in Suffolk County who knew me from when I was out in Centereach. And he said, Father Fink, yes. He says, I remember you were a Vietnam veteran, right? Yes. And he says, well, I'm wondering if you would be interested in something I want to tell you about. There's a professor at Stony Brook University who's going to be doing a year-long symposium on Vietnam and the Vietnam era. And rather than just teach it, lecture, what he'd like to do is have panel discussions every week. And it's going to be in a big auditorium. They're expecting a huge crowd of kids. They're very interested in this subject. Would you be interested in being on one of those panels? I kind of had mixed feelings, but I kind of gave in and said, sure, okay. And in the event, I wound up doing it 3 times, once at the very beginning, once in the middle, and once at the end of the whole series. And they were very well done and very impressive, and it was very interesting to see the reaction of the young people and to meet other guys on the panel, sometimes soldiers, sometimes protesters, sometimes politicians, and so forth. It was really to kind of give these young people a sense of what the times were like during the Vietnam era. After, I'm not sure whether it was the first or the second session, a guy comes up to me, having heard me speak, and he says, excuse me, Father, did I hear that you were in the 199th Light Infantry Brigade? I said, yeah, I was. He says, me too. I said, oh, when were you there, and what unit, battalion were you in, and so forth. So it turned out, same unit, the 199th Light Infantry Brigade, different brigades, and different times. We were not there together at the same time. So we're chatting and comparing notes, and I don't remember why, but I dropped the name of my platoon leader, Lieutenant Peter Joanidis. And he lit up, and he said, you're kidding me. Peter Joanidis is one of my best friends. I said, wait a minute. Peter Joanidis was my platoon leader. You weren't there with us. You were a different battalion, different time. He says, no. I met him afterwards down in Washington, D.C. He works for Coors Brewery, and they have a big veterans outreach program, and he's in charge of that. I said, wow, that's pretty neat. He was a great guy, and I talked to him. He says, I bet you Peter would love to hear from you. I said, oh, he's not going to remember. He says, yeah, he loves that kind of stuff. He'd love to speak to you. I have his card here. Why don't you give him a call? Now remember, this is 15 years later. So I took the card, and I gave him a call, and we had a lovely chat. And it was funny because I said, Peter Joanidis, my name's Charlie Fink. We were together in Vietnam, but I'm sure you don't remember me. And he said, of course I remember you. You're the only philosophy major I ever met in the Army. So we had this nice talk, and at the end we both said, it'd be great to see each other. We'll have to get together sometime. But I hung up thinking, it's never going to happen. We were just being polite to each other. About 2 weeks later, I get a call from Peter Joannidis, and he says to me, I'm going to be going to a wedding up in New Jersey. Why don't I swing by and we can get together for dinner? So 15 years after serving in Vietnam with Peter Joannidis, I'm meeting up with him. Now, not on the day I got wounded. He wasn't actually there that day. If you can believe it, he was in the rear with an ingrown toenail. But later on, he got very badly wounded, machine gun fire across the waist. He spent about 5 years being rehabilitated. So he limps up to me with a cane. We shake hands and hug, and it's great to see you, Peter. I really thought highly of the guy because he was such a confident, good soldier. I really felt, I remember him saying to me, just do what I tell you, learn from me what I have to say to you, and you're going to get home alive. So I felt I owed him a lot, and it was terrific to see him. We had a nice dinner. When he's going back to his car, we get to the car, and he says, listen, before I go, let me ask you a question. Does the name Jan Scruggs mean anything to you? I said, yeah, wasn't he with us in Vietnam? He says, yes, he was in the mortar platoon in our company, not our platoon, but our company. I said, I do remember Jan. He says, well, did you know that he's the guy who was responsible for building the Vietnam War Memorial, the wall down in Washington? I said, absolutely not. I said, that's unbelievable. He says, well, not only that, but the reason he did it is because of his friendship with some of the guys who died on the day you were wounded, including your squad leader, Claude Van Andel. I said, I can't, that's unbelievable. I knew all about the Vietnam War Memorial, but I had no idea there was a connection with my particular service and our squad and so forth. He says, I bet you Jan Scruggs would love to talk to you. I have his card here. Why don't you give him a call? So I did give him a call. And we have this nice conversation, and he tells me that besides building the wall, he wrote a book called To Heal a Nation. They actually made a TV movie out of it, a 2-hour TV movie, which I got to see. But in the book, he mentioned some of the things that prompted him to get the wall built. And one of the names that he drops in the book is Claude Van Andel. The book was read by one of Claude Van Andel's childhood friends, a girl he grew up with, nothing romantic, just like brother-sister, they grew up together. Her name was Jan Remick, and he says to me, I just got a letter from a woman named Jan Remick out in Nebraska. She was a childhood friend of Claude Van Andel, and she has questions about his death. And I think you could probably answer them better than I, because you were right there, whereas I was back further, a couple of 100 yards back. It was a pretty big operation. We were spread out pretty far. So he says, I have her number in front of me. She gave me her phone number in this letter. Would you be willing to call her? This is getting creepy now, So I said, okay. And that night, I called Jan Remick out in Nebraska. Actually, I called her law office. By now, she was a lawyer. And I get her secretary receptionist who thinks I'm some kind of weirdo stalker or something, Who are you? Why are you calling? You're not looking for a lawyer. What's going on here? So I explained. I finally said, look, would you do me a favor? Just tell Jan Remick that a friend and fellow soldier of Claude Van Andel is on the phone, and he was there when Claude died. And my understanding is she has some questions about that. Well, the phone went dead silent, and within a few seconds, Jan Remick was on the phone. And she grilled me a little, who are you? How did you get my number? And so forth. I explained. And once that was over, the conversation became a little warmer and friendlier. And she asked me, or rather she told me, that back in 1969, on May 26th, she was in the law library studying, and at about 11 o'clock at night, she heard a voice say to her, "Goodbye, Jan." Well, at 11 o'clock in the morning, where the sun had already come up, on May 27th, that's when he died. And she said she could still remember going home and talking to her father and saying, "What do you think this means?" Because she had no idea what it meant. And he kind of just said, who knows, don't worry about it. And the fact is, a body never came home. He didn't just get shot, he got blown up. And so they weren't sure of the details, they weren't sure of dates, they weren't sure of too much. She wasn't, nor was her father. But what she told me fitted in exactly with what I knew had happened. So she tells me this story, and then she says to me, I'm still very close to Claude's family, and because they've never seen a body, even though they know he must be gone, somewhere in their heart of hearts, they're hoping against hope that he might still be alive. So much so that they literally pan crowds if they see a crowd scene on the news or something, thinking maybe this blonde, blue-eyed Midwestern son of ours is going to show up somehow. There really had never been any closure. There really hadn't any proof. And they were still hoping that maybe this nightmare wasn't true. So she says, but you know it is true. I said, yes. She said, well, I have their number. Would you be willing to call them? I'm sure you could be a great comfort to them. And I did call Mr. and Mrs. Van Andel that night. First I talked to the father, and then I talked to the mother. And there were a couple of things they wanted to know. One, could I definitely verify that their son had been killed? Yes. But second, and this was heartbreaking to me, and those of you who were living back then maybe can understand this, they wanted to know, was their son still the boy they remembered when he died, or had the war turned him into the kind of a monster that was the way the media often pictured soldiers over there, committing atrocities routinely, drug-crazed, baby killers, all of that stuff. Which, just for your information, in case you're one of those who bought into that, was a large crock of you-know-what. We were just kids on the block sent to do a horrible job, and sometimes bad things happen, the way they do with cops or anyone else who's in a terrible position. But Claude was a terrific guy. He was kind of the class clown type of guy, so that when things were tough for us, he would purposely go out of his way to joke around or do something silly. I remember him jumping on a guy and wrestling him into the mud just to put on a wrestling match in this horrible climate, just to break the spell of how dark and difficult the times were. And that was typical of him. And it was also typical of him to do what he did for me. why don't you go back, I'll take over. He had been wounded twice, and he had also had malaria. He only had 50 days left in Vietnam, and he could have gone to his commanding officer and said, Captain, could I go to the rear and spend my last 50 days in the rear, just wait it out because of all he'd been through? But he didn't. So I was able to say to them with a perfectly clear conscience, your boy was loved by us all. He was a great kid. He'd make us laugh in the worst circumstances. And he was brave, and he was good. He was not a choir boy, but he was a good kid. And Vietnam killed him, but it didn't ruin him. They were so grateful. I went through that with his dad and then with his mom. And then the dad got back on the phone and he said, I'm going to ask a big favor of you. Our daughter lives in Arizona. I have her number here. Would you be willing to give her a call? And that night I called the daughter in Arizona, and I went through the whole thing with her. And that was the end of it, I thought. I had a call from Mr. Van Andel, who said, my wife and I are retired, and we're going to start driving around the country. We've always wanted to do that. And we'd love to come out and visit you and take you out to lunch or dinner. Would you be up for that? I said, I'd be delighted. I'd be delighted. And sure enough, a couple of weeks later, Mr. and Mrs. Van Andel, the mother and father of Claude Van Andel, whose name you can find on the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C., came and took me out to lunch. I can still remember the restaurant. It's got a new name now, but I can still see the place. I can still see where we sat and still see their faces. And we had a lovely lunch. And at the end of the lunch, they said to me, we'll never get over losing our son, but we can't tell you how much it means to us that the person whom he gave his life for is a man of God. And they were Protestants. And they didn't even mind that I was a Catholic priest. And so 15 years after this horrible experience, probably certainly one of the worst in my life, this wonderful experience of being put in a position where I was able to comfort these wonderful people was brought about by a series of unbelievable coincidences. If any one of those links in that chain was removed, I would have never met them. But every link was there. One coincidence might be a coincidence. Two, maybe. But this was like 6 in a row. A priest friend of mine who was a great genius, had doctorates in nuclear physics and theology, spoke 7 languages, wrote 80 books or so, internationally known. He once said to me as we were walking down a street in Princeton, New Jersey, I would meet him each year for lunch. He said, coincidence is a miracle God performs when he wants to hide in the background. God is hiding in the background all the time. Sometimes he comes into the foreground and you can't miss him. But even when he's in the background, he's there. We should have great confidence in that. And as we fight our battles and we lose some and win others, as we sometimes lament the little progress we make, as we feel that we failed in ways, as we bear heavy burdens in life, difficult, heavy crosses that we have to carry, when God seems far away or have forgotten us, he hasn't forgotten us. He's hiding in the background, watching over us. He's with us. And as Cardinal Newman said, he knows what he's about. I close with this prayer by Cardinal Newman. And just by the way, I could tell you, but I'm not going to inflict this on you tonight, at least another 6 to 10 stories just like that in my life. In my life. And I'd urge you to look back on your life and think of the links in the chain of events that have brought you to where you are. And imagine if one of them was removed. What would your life be like? There are no accidents in God's plan. There are just mysteries. And one day, they'll all be cleared up when we see God face to face. Oh my God, I put myself without reserve into your hands. Wealth or woe, joy or sorrow, friends or bereavement, honor or humiliation, good report or ill report, comfort or discomfort, your presence or the hiding of your presence. All is good if it comes from you. You are wisdom and you are love. What more can I desire? You have led me by your counsel, and with glory you will receive me. What have I in heaven, and apart from you, what want I upon earth? My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the God of my heart and my portion forever. Amen.